The nice thing about this is you do get the full history on all of the trade lines using this report. So this report also contains your collections data. And in this instance, you can see that this person does have some open collections. And that's certainly a factor for us when we're looking at tenant screening. We're looking at collections for utility companies, collections to other landlords, things of that nature. So having that collections data is incredibly valuable. You can see what is going on in someone's credit history. Are they just not paying their bills? We get some tenants that we screen that we say they've never met a bill in their life that they wanted to pay, and it shows on their credit history.
All right, Andrew. So let's start with the basic sort of the first thing that people probably want to know if they're not familiar. What is RentPrep.com? What kind of service does it offer landlords and real estate investors?
Sure. So broad strokes, RentPrep.com is a credit and background check company. They provide tenant screening services to help landlords make educated decisions when it comes to choosing tenants, which we just mentioned in the last segment helps to de-risk a situation. So the basic concept behind RentPrep is tenant screening in the form of credit and background checks, things of that nature, to help you find out more about someone before you basically turn over what could possibly be an asset worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, essentially.
Gotcha. Okay. And so how does it work? I don't know if we could maybe do a screen share and you can show us some of the functionalities of the site. Yeah,
absolutely. Let me get a screen share popped up here, and we'll just go right to the main RentPrep website to start things off here. There we go. So RentPrep, this is the main website here at RentPrep. It's pretty straightforward. I'm going to run through a couple of different product offerings that RentPrep has, if that's good with you.
Absolutely.
We'll probably start with, I'm going to start with just on the main page here, a couple different resources that are worth looking into. Obviously, we have the screening products here, which we'll get into in a second. We'll take a look at a couple of sample reports. But before I get into that, I do want to mention this section right here. And I think that we're going to come back to this in a later section of your video, talking a little bit more about pre-screening and things of that nature. But there's a ton of resources on the RentPrep website, specifically with tenant screening. So we'll come back to that in a minute.
Awesome.
But really what I want to start with right now is the different products that RentPrep does offer to help help landlords screen out their tenants a little bit. We're going to start with the TransUnion Full Credit, which is a more traditional credit report product. This is an applicant-involved product. And what I mean by that is essentially the landlord will decide, okay, I'm going to run a credit and background on this tenant. You enter the tenant's email address. The tenant has to go in and verify their identity. And then the report gets generated and it gets sent to the landlord through their RentPrep portal so that they can log in and view that information in a secure portal where it's not being exposed. You're not worrying about security risks and things of that nature. This is an automated report. This pulls directly from the TransUnion databases. The report is going to contain a credit history, a ResidentScore, a nationwide bankruptcy search, a nationwide criminal background check, and a nationwide sex offender registry. If you're in the state of New York, obviously, because of our laws here, you do not get the eviction history. And the price for New York landlords would be $32 as of the time of this recording. And then if you're outside of New York, you would get that nationwide eviction search, and you would be looking at $40 for that report. I do want to jump over and actually show what one of these reports looks like a little bit. Do you want me to actually kind of break down how I look at a credit report, or do you want me to just kind of run through the report in general?
No, absolutely. If you could go through it the way you would look at it with the eye of a property manager and someone who's in the industry, I think that would really help, some of the sort of smaller investors that may be watching or listening to this particular show.
Okay, yeah, definitely. So this is a little different than the reports that I see because I'm on the enterprise side of things, but it's more or less the same data. We're going to start with right here where it says SSN message, exact SSN match. And essentially that means that the information that the tenant provided for their social security number actually does match in the databases. So when it pulls the information from TransUnion database, it's obviously doing a lot of comparison to make sure it's giving you the correct information. That basically tells you that, yes, that social security number does tie back to that individual. Next, it jumps into basic information, addresses and things of that nature, when it was reported. And here you have one that was reported 316 and then a previous address reported 1116 with a PO box. The nice thing is that a lot of times you'll get multiple addresses. So for instance, this person's probably living here on 89th Street. but they may have a PO box that they were using for another purpose. Once they use that PO box or use a street address with any sort of a credit reporting product, so if they use it for a credit card or a bank or something like that, it will find its way back to the credit reporting bureaus, and it'll eventually find its way onto a report, which is nice. Scrolling down a little bit here into the profile summary, this actually gives you a pretty clear indicator right off the bat as to what somebody's situation is going to be from a credit perspective. You can see their total number of trade lines, how many of their trade lines are in collections, if they have any public records filed against them. Inquiries is how many people have looked at their credit in the past, I think 12 months. And then obviously down here you have your derogatories. So of the 13 trade lines, 8 of them are negative. 3 of them are historically negative, meaning that they were negative in the past. And then with total, any historical negatives, you would have a total of 6. It gives you a little bit of a breakdown here as to what their credit accounts are: revolving credit, installment credit, mortgage, things of that nature. And then finally, you get a resident score down here. Now, I want to mention that this is not a true FICO score. This is actually something that has been developed by TransUnion as an alternative to the FICO score for landlords specifically, because it's geared more towards the criteria that a landlord is focused on. I do want to spend a quick minute. I'm going to jump over to a blog article here that kind of discusses the difference between a resident score and a credit score, so that you can see, and this article is available right on the RentPrep website. By going and searching for resident score, it'll pop right up. But I do want to point out that talking about the differences between credit and resident score, these are the factors that would be looked at for a credit score: payment history, total debt owed, length of credit history, new and recent credit, and types of credit. And then when you scroll down and look at what's included in a resident score, you have positive and negative payment history for lines of credit, usage of credit, credit history, credit availability, and inquiry history. So they are very, very similar. It's all based on whatever the algorithm is that TransUnion is using. Obviously, we're never going to get a full look behind the curtain as to how they factor these scores, but it is using a lot of the same factors as a credit report would use to factor that resident score, but it compiles it in such a way that it makes a little bit more sense for landlords as opposed to banks that are basically using it for credit cards, auto loans, mortgages, things of that nature. So there are some slight differences there. It's not a true FICO score, but in theory, it should actually be more accurate in predicting whether or not a tenant is going to be good performing tenant, I guess is probably the best way to put it, versus a tenant that doesn't perform well. And then obviously, whenever you're talking about a new scoring system, you need to know how to look at that scoring system.
That was going to be my question.
Here, yeah, you can see here that it does give you some guidelines on what is a good resident score versus what is a bad resident score. And you can see that basically anything under a 560, they run from 350 to 850. And basically anything under a 560 is more or less going to put you in a situation where you're taking some risk there. And I think that's probably the best way of putting it. So again, this article, you can find this right on the RentPrep website by doing a quick search for resident score. It's literally the first article that pops up if you want to get some more information on that. But I did want to talk about what a resident score is before we jumped any further. The other thing I wanted to mention is this section right here, the scoring factors, is important because these are actually the scoring factors that FICO reports when you pull a credit report down. So you might not be getting a complete and total FICO credit score, but you are at least getting some information here as to what would be bringing the score up or down. So in this instance, on the sample report, you can see that there's some serious derogatory items, too many inquiries, too many or too few revolving accounts, things of that nature. The nice thing with the TransUnion full credit report is that you do get the account history as well, which is nice. I'm not going to sit and look through all of these, but I do want to point out a couple of things on this one because it's got some delinquencies in here.
Yep.
The nice thing is you can see essentially who the trade line is, what their balances are if they have one, what their payment amount is, things of that nature. The status of the account is always useful because that way you can know, okay, is it being paid the way it's supposed to? Is it delinquent? Has it been delinquent in the past? You know, what is the situation with this account? And then finally under remarks, you can see that this account is now closed. Scrolling down a little bit, this is still part of that same credit line. You can see here that they had some payments that were missed. For instance, in July of 2015 and September of 2016, they were 30 days late. So more than likely what ended up happening is the person either paid this account off or ended up refinancing it or something, because you can see it just drops off there at the end of 2017. The nice thing about this is you do get the full history on all of the trade lines using this report, which is pretty nice. I think a lot of landlords look for that information. And then scrolling down here, we'll get into the collections section. So this report also contains your collections data. And in this instance, you can see that this person does have some open collections. And that's certainly a factor for us when we're looking at tenant screening. We're looking at collections for utility companies, collections to other landlords, things of that nature. So having that collections data is incredibly valuable. You can see what is going on in someone's credit history. Are they just not paying their bills? We get some tenants that we screen that we say they've never met a bill in their life that they wanted to pay, and it shows on their credit history. And then you get other people where their credit is perfect. They have no issues whatsoever in any of their credit, which is very, very easy to tell from a report such as this.
Right.
The next thing I wanted to touch on is the public record search. For instance, here we have the bankruptcies. And this is also included in that report. The nice thing is with bankruptcies, you get some information as to where they filed, how long ago they filed, what the status of that case is. For instance, this one is a Chapter 7 bankruptcy that was discharged. But it's good to have that information available to you so that you know what you're getting yourself into in those instances where you are renting to somebody that has perhaps imperfect credit or damaged credit, something of that nature.
Right.
This report also comes with the nationwide criminal background check and the nationwide sex offender registry check. You can see this one popped up with one criminal record. And as you scroll down, you'll get more information on that as well. In this instance, it was just a criminal traffic. We get a lot of these where it'll pop up with, for whatever reason, New York doesn't seem to report their traffic tickets, but I've seen other states that have reported traffic tickets. It's weird to see somebody's speeding ticket pop up with a background check on them for renting. Occasionally that sort of thing does happen. And the nice thing is it tells you where the case was, what the disposition of the case is. So you can tell if somebody's still involved in an active court case or something along those lines, which we literally showed an apartment to this week to someone who admitted a pretty serious crime to us during the showing. And I know that it would have popped up here in the credit or the criminal profile when we ran them. But it's nice to know that you have the ability to get this information, even if somebody doesn't come right out and tell you, yes, I have some things that have happened in my past.
If you guys are getting value from this podcast so far, and if you're watching this on YouTube, please do me a favor and hit the like button. And if you have any questions for myself or Andrew as we go along, please feel free to put them in the comments below. And if you're watching or listening to this on any other podcast platform, please do me a favor and leave a good review and let us know that you enjoyed this podcast.
The one thing that is worth noting with any of this data is that the data that you get is only as good as the databases that the data is getting pulled from.
Right.
And some areas are much better at keeping their information up to date than others. Some areas have restrictions in what data can be pulled, New York being one of them, things of that nature. So the data on these reports, the automated reports, is only going to be as good as the information available out there in the databases. Finally, I wanted to touch on the eviction search here. This report does include a nationwide eviction search if you're not in the state of New York. Obviously, our laws are a little bit more restrictive on things like that. But you can see that there is an eviction here on this one on the sample report, which basically shows you, everything having to do with it. It shows you that it was a civil judgment. It shows you the amount of the civil judgment. So here in New York, at least here in the Buffalo region, maybe it's different in Albany. When we do an eviction, a lot of times we're not getting the money judgment at the same time.
Right.
Here in Cleveland, it seems that they must get the money judgment at the same time as the eviction. So that's kind of nice. But you at least know at that point, hey, this person was evicted. They owe this landlord, X number of dollars, whatever that dollar figure may be. And that kind of helps you to make a decision when it comes to your tenant screening as well. And that's kind of the end of this report. It's a pretty in-depth report. It gives you a lot of information. There are a couple of add-ons that you can add to this report as well. As far as add-ons, there is the nationwide liens and judgment search. A lot of people aren't aware of this, but as of 2017, liens and judgments no longer appear on credit and background checks naturally. That was something that was changed in the, I believe, changed by the credit bureaus. It wasn't something that was like a RentPrep just decided we're not going to include that. That was a change from the credit bureaus. So now if you want that nationwide lien and judgment search, you do have to pay a little bit extra for that. And I think that's currently $7. The nice thing about that is that's a hand compiled report. So combining that with the existing credit report, you get a lot of information there. And then the other add-on that I wanted to mention is income verification using PayScore, which is actually the closing docs. I think they're in the process of rebranding right now.
Mm-hmm.
And the nice thing about that, when you're doing when you're doing income verification, and actually I could pull an income verification report up as well. The nice thing is when you do this income verification is it's pulling directly from the tenant's bank. They have to log in using their bank credentials, and it basically pulls a 1-year history of all of the income that they've had come through their bank account, and it breaks it down into both recurring and non-recurring. And again, we're looking at a sample report here, but you can kind of see that there is recurring income. It also pulls their account balances as well, which is useful to know. So you can see here that they have a checking account and a savings account, shows you what their current balances and available balances are. It also tells you what their average balance is, which is kind of useful information when you're talking about a 12-month period. Here on the sample report, for instance, you can see this person was running a negative balance in their checking account for the past 12 months, the trailing 12 months. So that's something that would certainly be worth considering when you're talking about tenant screening. Scrolling down a little bit, you can see that it also breaks out your income sources as payroll. Recurring is typically going to be payroll and things of that nature. And you can see here essentially what the total source is, what the monthly amount was, things of that nature. And then non-recurring, this is good for things such as tax refunds will pop up on this. If you're out doing deliveries for Uber or Lyft or DoorDash or something like that, that's considered irregular income. That would all pop up in here as well. And it also gives you a pretty good indicator of when that income is coming in. So it gives you a really good indication as to what someone's true income is when you run one of these reports. And the nice thing is this report gets run and sent directly to the landlord. So there's no chance for the tenant to make changes to their income or generate a fake pay stub, which I'm sure you know is a huge issue right now in the world. This is probably the easiest. It's way too easy to do. We're actually going to be doing an episode on fake pay stubs in the very near future. I've had a few come through our office in the past couple months, and they're getting better, man. They're getting a lot more creative with how they're doing it, and they're getting harder to determine as fake. So this is probably one of the most powerful tools for landlords right now when it comes to screening tenants. If you're talking about really trying to verify income and understand what someone's income situation is, you can't get any more realistic than pulling the data directly from their bank. It doesn't get any more, accurate than that, really.
With income verification, let's say, and this is probably going to be a smaller percentage of the people that are applying, because most people have W-2 jobs. They're just getting paid regularly through paychecks. Let's say you have, I don't know, a construction worker or someone like that who's saying, hey, a freelancer, I get paid inconsistently. Like I get paid a certain amount of money on average per month, but it's not like a paycheck. You're not going to see, $1,200 coming in every week and hitting my account on a Friday. What do you do with that? How do you handle that?
Something like that would probably pop up on the report as if it's coming in on a regular basis, like if somebody is receiving a paycheck, say every 2 weeks, but it's an inconsistent amount, I'm pretty sure that would still pop up as recurring income, to be honest with you. Either way, even if it popped up as non-recurring income, you are still going to capture that data, and you'll be able to tell what their true income is based off of the deposits into their bank account. And
then the other thing I wanted to ask you about, and maybe we'll do a little recap of the costs and the different reports and the different add-ons that you can do, just so that people are kind of keeping up with it. But so we have a difference between the price point for a state like New York, which restricts certain aspects of the report. And then we have the national price point. What were those two price points again?
Sure. So jumping back to this is the TransUnion full credit. And this is the rebranded Smart Move. If you're familiar with what's the old Smart Move reports, this is the Smart Move report with the new ResidentScore tied into it, essentially. So that's basically just a rebrand on TransUnion's end. This product, if you are in the state of New York, you're not going to get that nationwide eviction data. It's going to run you $32. And then if you're outside of New York, where you are going to get that eviction data, that would be $40.
Okay, that's $40. Okay. And then we had the income verification, which you just mentioned. What was
Correct.
the
Yeah,
one
and I'll
about
pull that back up.
$7 you said?
The income verification is $10, and that runs through PayScore, which is the closing docs. They're in the process of rebranding right now. I think that they may be like literally this week changing from closing docs to PayScore.
Gotcha. And then the last thing that you mentioned was liens and judgments, right?
Yeah, if you wanted to do the lien and judgment add-on, that is $7.
Okay.
And that's hand compiled. I want to make sure that that's so when you're talking about these reports, the TransUnion full credit, this is an automated report. So there's not a human touching this report unless you're ordering that liens and judgment search. And then they're actually going to hand compile that component of it in the RentPrep offices to make sure that that data is accurate. Basically comparing the tenant's actual information, name, date of birth, social security number, versus the records that they're pulling for liens and judgments to make sure that the information that you're being provided is actually accurate. I do want to mention that there was a large property management company. I won't say the name of the company. I should say, sorry, large property management software company that was sued maybe last year or the year before about their tenant screening practices because they were not doing any data verification on anything really. And they were reporting both a lot of false positive data and a lot of false negative data. They were sued and settled, but it was multiple millions of dollars that they ended up settling for. So making sure that the data that you're using is as accurate as possible is certainly something that helps protect you as a landlord. And that's definitely something that is top of mind at RentPrep when they're doing the hand compiled stuff.
Gotcha. And you guys RentPrep has dedicated staff that work on these reports?
Yeah, absolutely. The nice thing is, so if you have a question about a screening report, which I look at these things multiple times a week, and there are still times when I have questions on credit reports, or I see something that doesn't make sense, or I see something on the application that doesn't jive with what I'm seeing on the actual credit profile. You can call and talk to a live screener anytime during the week, 9 to 5. I think it's 9 to 7, Monday through Friday. And I believe they also have some people in the office on Saturday as well. But the nice thing is you can actually call and talk to a live screener and they can kind of walk through the report with you, answer any questions that you may have. They may be able to explain, why something did or did not appear on a credit report that you think should or should not be there. It's kind of nice when you can actually call and talk to a live human being about any report that you have run, whether it's an automated report through the TransUnion full credit or whether it's the hand compiled stuff. They will sit down and walk through that stuff with you if you just give them a call. They're very easy to get a hold of. I don't think I've ever had a hold time anytime that I've called, to be honest with you.
And I would say too, there are a lot of tenant screening providers out there.
Yeah.
And I don't know of too many that offer this level of service if you wanted to actually reach out to someone in the customer service department and actually talk to them and get information and questions answered. And I think that's definitely a pretty big selling feature for RentPrep in the accuracy of the data and the ability to reach out and talk to a live human being.
I would say that those are, at least in my opinion, those are the two most important features of RentPrep beyond everything else that they do, beyond, everything that they provide as far as the Facebook group, the information on the blog post, the podcast, all of that stuff is secondary to the fact that the information that gets provided by RentPrep is as accurate as possible whenever possible. And again, we did mention that we're limited obviously by the information that's available in the databases. But it's nice to know that the information that you're getting is as accurate as possible.
100%. And also, I'd just like to mention to everyone who's watching this, especially if you're watching this on the YouTube platform, I'm going to put an affiliate link in the description below. If you guys want to check out RentPrep, you can follow that link. If you do end up using the service, it's completely free to set up an account. But if you do end up using the service through RentPrep, it's not going to cost you anything extra if you do use my link, but it is something that is an affiliate link. I am affiliated with RentPrep in that respect. And actually, this also brings me to the other question or point I wanted to make is in most states, New York excluded, correct me if I'm wrong, you can pass on the cost of the screening to the tenants, to the applicant. Is that correct?
Yes. So here in New York, obviously, we do have restrictions. It's $20 for the credit and background check fee. You can't call it an application fee anymore. It has to be called a credit and background check fee, and it's capped at $20. So in the state of New York, the way RentPrep is set up in the state of New York, if you do pull one of these full credit reports, the landlord has to pay for it on their end, simply because of the restrictions. In other states, you can actually pass that on to the tenant and have them pay for it when they go in and do their identity verification. And then once they do the ID verification and they make the payment, then it generates a report and sends it over to the landlord for them to take a look at.